Good evening. I'd like to call the regular committee of the whole meeting for Monday, January 16th, 2023 to order at 6 p.m. And to say my name is Councillor Garnett. I'll be chairing the meeting, and the rest of my committee members are all in attendance. My far left is Councillor Novak, then Councillor O'Keefe and Councillor Rintoul. To my far right, Councillor Duck, Councillor Duncan, and Mayor McNeil-Smith. I also like to say good evening to the staff members that are in attendance in the chambers, and to those staff members joining by Zoom, and to those in the public who are watching live via the webcast, and to those who will watch later on the website once it's put up, and to the public, the few members that are here tonight. Thank you for joining us. I'll begin by respectfully acknowledging that we're holding this meeting on the territory of the Wasanich Nations, and we thank them for their stewardship over these lands and waters for millennia. Next up is approval of the agenda, and there are no new items that I can think of.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councillor Duck, seconded by Councillor O'Keefe. Any additions or anything that anybody wants to add? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? Opposed? No opposed. Motion carries unanimous. Normally in our committee of the whole meetings, we have a public participation period at this point. And public can speak to anything on the agenda. And as of tonight, there's only one item on the agenda. So we're going to hold that public participation after the presentation, where there is normally a public participation. And if it seems like there'd be more time added, we can look to adding time or move a motion at that time. But I think judging by the size of the room, we should be okay. So next up, we'll move to approval of the minutes.
So moved.
Can I just hold on? For the regular committee of the whole meeting for December 12th, 2022.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Duck, seconded by Councillor Rintoul. Any errors, omissions? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Motion carries unanimous. And we go down to the next on our list, which is the development application. So for that process will be, there will be a presentation by the applicant. Following that, there will be public participation I spoke to earlier, where public can provide comment and ask questions. And following that, committee members will have the opportunity to ask questions of the applicant or presenter. So this is for zoning amendment number RZ 100104 and development permit number DP 100838, and that is at 2180 Beacon Avenue West, to rezone the property in order to develop a 5-story 140-unit multi-unit residential apartment development with surface and underground parking. And in attendance, presenting will be Mr. Dean Strongatharm. And also in attendance is Mr. Joe Newell and Mr. Brad Forth, and we have Mr. Andy Zhao, I believe, on a Zoom. So the floor is yours, and I'll start off by asking, you have 10 minutes for the presentation, but if you're comfortable with that, that's fine, but if you need more time, do you think you might or not?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, sorry, the red button there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to go through the slides relatively quickly, so I'm hoping about 10 minutes should do it.
If you need more time, we can make a motion to give you more time.
Okay, thanks, but I'll do my best. Now, okay. The first thing is the technical. Just make sure I know how to do this up. Where shall we point it to? There. Okay. Mr. Chair, members of council, my name is Dean Strongatharm. I am a planner by trade and the coordinator for this application, and as the chair mentioned, in the audience is our landscape architect and architect, and then on the phone for the owner is the project manager. The owner, Anupam Kathari, will perhaps come on a bit later, but I know I'm talking today, he had sort of competing times, so with that, I think the best thing to do, I'll just go through the application. I think I'll just start off by saying, in terms of reading the staff report, it was a pretty thorough report, along with, I think, hopefully the information that we've submitted, and I think pretty accurately identifies what the application is about. As a result of that, as I say, I'll certainly try to go through these slides relatively quickly and allow for comment. And again, I don't have to tell you exactly where it is. It's at a very, very, very prominent corner at Beacon and the Pat Bay Highway on the northwest side. It is about 2 acres in size, and as I say, it is relatively flat. Although the local area plan calls for the long-term redevelopment of the lands to the east, or to the west, I should say, but as you can see, it is currently predominantly detached single-family, modest detached single-family homes. I think it's important to note that the location is significant in as much of its location relative to major employment hubs, obviously commercial sector downtown on Beacon Avenue and the surrounding streets, proximity to parks, other recreational facilities, and of course across the street the event center and cultural center, as well as of course the wonderful walking trail around the airport land. So it does have, it is very prominently located with all kinds of amenities that are accessible within a easy walking distance. Again, I won't belabor this as I think it's been, but basically we're looking at a 2-acre site, zoned for 140 units. When we first filed this application, it was actually slightly larger, it was 141, but as a result of conversations, the building has been altered, and as a result, there's actually one less unit in terms of the number of units. As mentioned in the report, there is a combination of some surface parking, but the majority of the parking is in one level of underground immediately underneath the building, and the intent there is to, in terms of maximizing the amount of natural grade in terms of stormwater penetration and minimizing the amount of hard surface below the ground. And so basically the parking lot runs right underneath the existing building. Again, this application came before council, and I believe it was on the 7th of March 2022. At that time, understandably, because you were going through the OCP amendment process, or at least a new OCP, and so therefore it was thought wisely to put it on hold until such time as that process had been approved, which was done so, of course, at the end of June. And as a consequence of that, the actual application was slightly amended, because originally there was an application for both rezoning and OCP, whereas the application now is not for an OCP amendment, it's for a rezoning application and development permit. And again, this is the west side plan, and I say it identifies that particular site for higher density residential development for up to 6 stories. And again, this is in my letter to you in the planner's report, so I won't repeat it, but we're looking, as I say, at about almost identical, exactly a 2-acre site. We're looking for a floor space ratio in terms of what is proposed at about 1.64. It's, as I say, I think in the planner's report says it's kind of in between a maximum density of 2 and obviously lower densities below the 1.64. But as I say, what we've tried to do is minimize, if I can call it, the site coverage to a maximum of 35%. There's 145 parking stalls. Our report done our transportation engineers did a combination of a parking impact assessment and a traffic impact assessment. And all the parking impact assessment was actually based on the original screen of 141 units, and it's now 140, and at that time they'd identified the maximum number of stalls required as 140, which is consistent with the city's, the town's bylaw. I would also say, and it's identified in the staff report, that the traffic impact assessment, because that's such a prominent intersection, was actually forwarded to, by our consulting engineers, forwarded to the MOTI, to Ministry of Highways, and not too long ago, just before Christmas, we did receive an email back, and I think also forwarded to staff that it was accepted and approved by MOTI in terms of the traffic engineer's assessment and the impacts in terms of traffic demand. I think the only thing I'll say here is that it's not just slightly below 60% of the units are 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom. In my experience of doing many applications for rezoning throughout the region, that is a higher percentage of 2 and 3 bedrooms that you often see and experience in an apartment application. Often you see studio units and 1 bedrooms being the predominant, whereas this in fact, the predominant style or type of units is 2 and 3 bedrooms. I think the other thing, again, from my experience in other projects, These units also tend, in terms of livability, tend to be on the higher side of what units you'll find. To say the average one bedroom is at around 700 square feet. The average two bedroom is around 850 to 900 square feet. And the three bedrooms are, as I say, 100 to up to about 1,200 square feet. So for an apartment building, in my experience, again, there's been an emphasis on the livability of the units. In terms of consultation, I know this is referred also in the planner's report. There was a neighborhood meeting, and this is all informed changes that we've made to the plan since it was originally submitted back about a year ago. Excuse me. We had held a neighborhood meeting, actively attended, and I think a couple of members of council were at that meeting. Again, we were at the meeting and received some feedback in terms of the time at which it was put on hold on March the 7th. We've obviously reviewed the OCP, the new OCP and the design guidelines associated with it, as well as the local area plan, the West Side Plan. And then I would give due credit to staff, both planning staff and meetings with engineering staff, in terms of the assistance they've provided in terms of accommodating us, in terms of us asking questions and receiving feedback. So I do acknowledge that very much. So as a result of that, just generally, the original application looked like this, and I don't think I've got a, does this have a, I guess it really won't show up on the screen anyways, but key things are, on the right-hand side, well, actually, if I go to the next slide, what we heard is, in terms of this building's proximity to Beacon Avenue, both with the combination of road dedication, that part of the building should be set back away from Beacon Avenue. There was concern about, I've got two, it doesn't really matter, but in terms of there is a large area for garden plots for use by residents, and that location was felt to be on the west, just on the west side of the west building, that wouldn't accommodate as, it would receive perhaps more shade than, we should look at other locations. Big thing at the end of Jan Place was the building angled back to the west and came towards the common property line with the nearest property on Jan Place. That has now been eliminated. Again, in deference to the concerns that have been raised in terms of impacts on neighbors. The building itself had one major break in it. It is now actually got a second break in it, so there actually are effectively three sections. And then we've reevaluated some of the landscaping that goes along the very front, along the Pat Bay Highway. So there are other things obviously that have taken place, but looking at kind of big changes from those members of council that were here back in March the 5th, or 7th, I should say, that those are kind of key elements that we've heard and hopefully responded to. So in fact, it does look like this. So you can see again that there is a significant setback from and again, people who are up there won't see me, but from the property adjacent, the residential property adjacent on Jan Place. There's the garden vegetable pots have been moved, as you can see. There's been the retention of the three of the existing fir trees, which you can see on this plan, are those larger, sort of lighter orange, large circles in that central courtyard and a garden area on the south side of the building. And then there were some other relocation, including, of course, a major setback from Beacon Avenue. That was definitely set back an additional several meters, and then was much more attention paid, which I'll show you in a minute, better be mindful of time, in terms of how we tried to address some of the points that were raised by staff in particular. I won't go through this. It is a five-story building. When you do get to the top floor, it is set back, so it does have this impression of a five-story building, but the fifth, it is a five-story building, but in terms of the image, because of the setback, and that's one of the architectural attempts to kind of minimize impacts, that it, as I say, the entire floor has been set back from the sides, both fronting onto Pat Bay Highway as well as fronting onto the rear courtyard. Once again, as I said, there is a certain element of surface parking, but the underground parking is entirely under the building, and so where those impervious areas are going to be, that in fact it's right immediately below the building. That was done by design. Also, in terms of not having that return of the building towards Jan Place, it did allow for moving the underground parking away from that area, which then allowed for larger planting to be placed between the neighbor to the west and the subject property, once again in deference to the neighbor in terms of trying to preserve or at least mitigate any impacts. Oh, I guess I'm going the wrong way. I won't go into this, but again, because of the design and the articulation, there are a number of different floor plans. I won't bother to go in them, but just to show, to demonstrate that there are quite an array of floor plans, which again, I think from a point of view of a livability and options to a future resident, it is a very positive thing. I won't go, I'm not the architect, but I will say that looking at the plans in terms of the changes that have been made to the outside, we were asked to and look at the design guidelines that were part of the new OCP, as well as, of course, the design guidelines that are part of the 2017 West Side Local Area Plan. So it is a combination of paneling, cementitious paneling. There is corrugated metal. There is some sheet metal. There's an extensive use of rock, all of which came about as a result of, say, looking at and interpreting some of both the feedback we got, but as well as, I think, importantly, the design guidelines along the front, which this is actually the south front, so this is fronting along Beacon Avenue. There's also been an attempt to introduce some wood elements, so we've tried to keep it try to adhere to the design guidelines in the plan, and also come up with something which we think actually is very attractive. Oops, going the wrong way. This is facing east, so it's actually looking at the interior courtyard, and so in fact that it looks like a very long building, but it is articulated, and you just can't do it when you've only got two planes. But once again, same element of different types of materiality on the in terms of the frontage. And finally, this is actually on the Pat Bay Highway, and you can see once again that introduction of, there's some strong elements of the stone face going up to the fourth floor. As you can see, the reason why the front is darker and the two parts are grayer, because there is this articulation of the building, and setback is trying to demonstrate that a little bit. And then, as you can see, while there's a continuity of the design, but you can see in the three elements, there's been a little bit of an architectural change in terms of the roof line on the part on the north side. The center has got a bit of a hipped roof, angled roof, and then, as you can see, towards the Beacon Avenue and the Pat Bay Highway, you can see just integrated, but just trying to create a different design element. This is the main corner. This is that major intersection at Beacon Avenue and the Pat Bay Highway. And as you can see, a lot of attention has been paid, and to actually make a curved centerpiece, if I can call it that. And I won't get into the landscaping, but I know the landscape architect has also looked at that in terms of the actual landscape plan, and introducing landscape elements that will also kind of preserve or enhance that prominent corner. I should also say that same curved element in a slightly smaller way, but has been mirrored on the north side as well, so you've got that kind of symmetry. I'm talking like an architect, and I'm not. I just want to spend a couple of seconds on this, because we did receive quite a lot of input, particularly about the Beacon Avenue. And so what we have here, so this is looking at Beacon Avenue, so all the ground floor units all have individual accesses. You can see each one has a gate leading into their own unit. They can get access from a common hallway at the rear, a single loaded hallway. But a lot of attempt has been made, both in terms of looking at the street front. That's new. That would be new curbs, new sidewalk, new boulevard, planted boulevard. And you can see kind of the elements that have been as well as a new bus stop, which you can see kind of on the left-hand side. This is looking towards the interior courtyard. And once again, I think the important point here is that you can see the three they are looking like fir trees. Those are three existing fir trees that wasn't in the original plan, but which we've tried to preserve as a result of changing things around. I think the other important, you can just see at the very lower left-hand corner, kind of the introduction of the, excuse me, of the garden plots. And then what was always part of the project, but because we have 2 and 3 bedroom units, there certainly is an indication, we believe that there will be numbers of families, and so as a consequence, there is a playground coming off 2 activity rooms, one with thinking being for seniors, one actually being for families, which you don't see here, but it fronts onto a patio area. I don't know this thing actually. I guess you probably won't see this, so it doesn't really matter. But coming right off the activity room so that there's eyes and ears looking onto the playground space and an integrated, you can see the pathway that flows through here. So I think the landscape architect and the architect had a lot of thought in doing it. And that's just simply a close-up where once again you can see the children's playground, you can see a lot of landscape elements as well as coming off the activity rooms and the main entrance, and the 2 activity rooms are on the right, just on the right-hand side of the main entrance, and that will allow for opportunities for people to enjoy, obviously west-facing, so we'll get the afternoon and evening sun. Ooh, that was a bit of a scare. Oh, there we go. Different. I won't go into this, but I know the landscape architect has looked at, in terms of major planting along the frontage of the properties that front on to the west of us, in terms of the neighborhood there. You can see once again the garden plots, and then the heavy introduction, which was different than the last plan in terms of landscaping along that common frontage to the westerly properties. It has introduced a lot of flowering trees and flowering elements, major trees along the boulevard, and you can see there's been a significant increase in change in terms of the frontage along the Pat Bay Highway. The landscape architect has introduced a massive volume of new vegetation, fairly of good size, so that obviously over time there will be a very heavy buffer area, as well as the stormwater features that integrate into the project. Again, another little detail, I won't belabor this, but again, you can see a level of detail off the activity room and the playground area for children. And again, similarly, this is just along Beacon Avenue, but I thought it just to give you a little bit of a sense in terms of how the architect has approached the project with respect to both the elements of material as well as the elements of those entranceways into that first row of units along Beacon Avenue. I think I'm getting very close to the end. Just a detail, this is also in the development permit plans, but again, a lot of thought has been taken to in terms of the either street furniture interior to the project, as well as arbors, and just, as I say, the thought process around sort of little bits of detail in terms of landscape material elements. Shadow study was done, and you can see, although it's hard to read, this is 9/12, 9/11, 2, and 5, I think it is. And you can see the 2 equinoxes, both March and September, the sun is at the same height. But as you can see, the only time when there could possibly be any shading whatsoever on the adjacent properties is at 9 o'clock in the morning on December 21st. So assuming it's not snowing, that's the only time, because of obviously how low the sun is on the horizon, even any of us standing have this huge shadow that's cast. So really, by the positioning of the building, we've made every attempt to ensure that that we are minimizing impacts, certainly when it comes to things like shadow impacts. Housing, as I say, it's 140 units. Now it's going back a couple of years now in terms of Sydney's housing needs study, but it did identify a need for rental housing. It did talk about larger units. We're proposing on the table, proposing a housing agreement rented for a minimum of 10 years. We're proposing an affordable contribution to units of 20% of the units of being below market, which is defined by CMHC as not spending more than 30% of your family income on rent, shelter. Key features, and again, I'm just summarizing now: rental housing, sizable units, both in terms of the number of 2 and 3 bedrooms, as well as the size of those units. High degree of walkability in terms of looking at one of that second or third slide in terms of where the employment is, where other amenities are. I believe there's a lot of thought gone into landscaping, and I haven't really gone into the stormwater management, but there's a lot of thought process gone into that. All units have outside balconies, recreation areas and amenities areas, the garden areas and children's playground, etc. Improved and significantly widened boulevard along Beacon Avenue, and in particular the sidewalk. And then, as I mentioned, about the 20% below market rental units, and ample off-street parking as per our traffic engineer's report, and exceeding the city's bylaw requirements. And I think that's it. I don't know how much over 10 minutes I went, but thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Not a problem. I know there's a lot to go through. Thank you, and we'll just maybe get you to sit
Sure.
back down, and then if there are any questions, you can back up.
Thank you.
So at this point, we'll open up to public participation, and we'll allow members of the public to approach. The microphone's on, so you don't need to turn it on. Just provide your name and your municipality you reside in. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Gerald Moffat. I live at number 79512 Lochside Drive in Sydney. I think the following needs to be said at the outset of the application of this project rather than as we get further along. Because I think it's an important issue that will shape how the rest of it is approached. Last year's Sydney Council made a serious error. The question tonight is whether Council will have the courage and integrity to correct that error, or will instead compound it by approving an oversized development project. The serious error was not truly re-examining the West Side local area plan in conjunction with the reissue, the new OCP. Apparently, Galleran neighborhood residents are second-class citizens who live on the wrong side of the tracks, or the wrong side of the Pat Bay. And apparently they don't deserve even a hearing or examination of their issues and concerns as the new OCP was being prepared. That was more than an injustice. It was a serious error, and the ugly ramifications are now becoming all too clear. The West Side Area Plan was produced in 2017 during the worst excesses of the price regime. The plan reflects the obsessive drive to overreaching development of that era. Fortunately, development excesses of the price regime were resoundingly rejected in the 2018 municipal election. Mayor Price and several of his supporting councillors were not just defeated, they were humiliated. And Price and former councillor were again resoundingly rejected in the 2002 election, which we just had. Sydney residents have repeatedly spoken loudly, clearly, and consistently. They don't want monstrous high-rises forced on low-density neighborhoods. Council should listen. Fortunately, Council's error is currently only a paper one at present. It's still correctable. The error should be corrected before Sydney becomes saddled for the next 50 years with an enormous, incongruous development. Now, errors happen, but the real test is whether we are man enough or woman enough to correct our error. or whether we make excuses and rationalizations for persisting in the error and compounding it. I'm hoping Sydney councillors are big enough to change an error. The proposed development is huge and monolithic, despite the tinkering. It wouldn't be approved for construction in downtown Sydney's core. And yet it can be foisted on the Galeran neighborhood of single family and duplexes, overwhelming it. And not just it, but it as the precursor of more high-rises yet to come, further walling in that neighborhood. This is not fair or right. The project should be, Sydney does need rental housing, but not this way. There are better and fairer ways for Sydney to achieve reasonable growth in rental housing without grossly oversized high-rises reminiscent of a Siberian mining town. This project should be scaled back to something like 80 housing units using several independent three-story buildings. And council is not locked into the current OCP and West Side plan. Not yet. They have a great deal of freedom still. To say they are locked in is a weak excuse. Council definitely has sufficient power to make changes. The OCP, zoning bylaw, and development permit process together include sufficient provision to allow council to have a cold, hard look at this proposed project and modify it so it actually meets Sydney's objectives. In closing, I again ask council to have the courage and integrity to scale this project back right from the outset and not blight and suffocate the Galeran neighborhood. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Moffat. I'll look for a second time if anyone would like to address the committee. And for a third and final time, seeing none, I'll close public participation. And we'll move to committee members who might choose to have questions for the applicant. And we'll start with Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Mr. Strongatharm, for your presentation. I'm pleased to see the below market commitment that's here, and I won't dwell on it. But the question through to you, and you have the opportunity to answer questions at committee at this point. The question through to you, if you would speak to the 10-year minimum that you've referred to, and my question is, do you intend to stratify the units during the development process and building process, and is it the developer's intent to convert the project to condominiums following that 10-year period you referred to? So that's my first question, if I may, through the chair.
Please feel free to step up to the microphone.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yet that was what was put on as a proposal, was the 10-year housing agreement. The Cathari Group actually does, the majority of the buildings that they have are actually 100% are rental. The intention would be to strata the building for the potential, but it is a discussion in terms of the length of the agreement. We've identified 10 years, but I've had some preliminary discussions with staff on that, and perhaps that's something that we can look at further. But as I say, in terms of the below market, I mean, that is one of the things that I do a lot of pro forma work in terms of building pro formas, apartments pro formas, and I do know how difficult it is these days to actually even make a straight with rental building work without the affordable component. And so, in my opinion, I'm just speaking for myself, not for the owner, I think the offer in terms of a 20% below market is a significant offer based on the work that I've done for other clients. But I guess, I'm not sure if I 100% answered your question. The intent would be that it would be strata title, the intent that there would be restrictive covenants by way of housing agreements. Most municipalities use housing agreements, other than Colwood, they use 219 covenants, but to guarantee rental, and the similar covenant would guarantee it in terms of the final definition of the units and the amount of below, the amount that it specifically is below market, and that would be all worked out in terms of further discussions with staff.
Sorry, could you repeat that last section with respect to the amount of units that would be below market rental? My understanding is it's 20%.
20%, yes, correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you're confirming that?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, if I may, through the chair, I think that answers my question. So you tend to stratify the development as part of the project, and the period of time in which you would look to guarantee that they would remain rentals is on offer at 10 years, but open to some discussion is what I hear from you. I do have some
Correct.
concern with that period of time, but I'll leave it
Correct.
certainly to other colleagues to express their thoughts as well. My second question, if I may, is if you could comment on the intent right now around HVAC, so heating and cooling for the building.
Yeah, that's a question. So the final heating system has not been identified. One of the things, though, that has been specifically discussed, because there's two potential things that came up. Number one is particularly on the west side, and you get heat buildup. So the intention is, and the research that's been done, is actually going to a low E coating glazing. And so what that does is actually put on, and we're also, as I say, from a sound penetration, looking at triple glazing for the windows, because there was also a discussion around noise, outside noise coming in. And so what we are currently looking at, and the research we're doing on this, as I say, this special E-glazing, where you put this coating on the inside of the outermost glazing, and that then provides both reflection from solar gain inside, as well as it actually also, with triple glazing, it actually does the reverse in terms of maintaining either heat or cooling from inside. So that's what we've been looking at doing specifically, was this special e-glazing to try to address that particular issue. Again, I do want to emphasize, final detailed in terms of the mechanical system at this stage has not been finalized.
Thank you, and I'll just take the opportunity then to suggest that I think that the triple glazing is a great idea, given its proximity to the highway,
Yeah.
for sound barrier, of course. But you're absolutely right; those west units, which you referred to as having sunny deck spaces, might actually be too sunny and too warm to fully utilize, and that's just a personal experience with a northwest exposure locally. I think as you're addressing heating and cooling, that the developer needs to, really look to some of the recent lessons in climate change and the heat dome that we saw 2 summers ago, and recognize that without, a commitment to a full HVAC system, that a lot of these units will be unbearably warm at times of the year. So I'll leave my comments there, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Stormingham.
Thank you.
Councillor Duck?
Thank you, Chair. I have 3 questions, if I have that, if I can continue through that. Again, thank you for your presentation, Mr. Strongham. Start with a simple question. On the north end of the property, there's currently a walkway that goes through to Skylark Place. Will there be a connection from this property to that, so that people can access out to both Skylark and out to the pathway?
It goes out. I'm sorry, it goes out to the walkway along
Correct.
the Pat Bay Highway?
Yeah.
And is it on this property, or, because there's a large V-shaped piece of property that's actually owned by the Ministry of Highways?
The current pathway goes directly through to Skylark, so
Yeah,
it's right at the
yeah.
foot of Skylark, so I
Well,
don't know from your diagram.
Certainly, I don't think we've identified that specifically, but I think it's a valid point. I mean, if there's any way to ensure that if there's an existing connection, to maintain that connection, it's certainly something we would definitely look at,
Okay, may I, yeah, thank
absolutely.
you, Chair. Certainly, I remember watching this. I wasn't on council when this was first presented, but I congratulate you for adapting the design a bit more, because it didn't look very favorable at that time. But my bigger concern is that it's very appealing in its presentation, but that presentation, would look good on a residential block somewhere in a town. But those two streets it faces onto are highly trafficked streets. And I wonder if there's any consideration in the initial design of stepping it back and understanding the buffer you want to create with the neighbors. But you did sort of do that a bit on Beacon West, but still very exposed to the highway, which is the high traffic area. Any consideration to one of two objectives, stepping it back further in that development, but also alternately, and this goes to the questions raised in public participation, looking at a more perpendicular structure of three independent buildings that are perpendicular to the highway and to Councillor Rintoul's aspect would alleviate more of the western exposure, because you would be going east-west on those buildings. So there's a couple of just thoughts, if there's any consideration in the initial design. I realize you're past that point, but just for consideration.
Yeah, I mean, we did look at a couple of several options, kind of iterative options, going through the process, and sort of, it's like the old balloon, you put it here and something sort of pops out there. And so, and one of it was for sure looking at trying to stay away from the neighbors to the west. That was certainly one of the things, and even that one change that we made was in direct response to that. It is designed to be a rental building for a minimum, perhaps longer than 10 years. Having, in terms of mechanical, having three buildings with three different mechanical systems, three different sets of elevators, and then you get into the whole issue about the underground parking and how you then, and again, as you could see, the underground parking is right totally under the building, trying to sort of minimize the amount of hard surface that's being occupied. So we did look at that, but really it came to the conclusion that if we could move the building midly towards, or keep it towards the highway, and then articulate the building. And one of the things is to say that you really didn't get into any detail, and I realize I can only do a certain amount of buffer, but the new landscape plan has really, and the landscape architect is here, probably don't need to get into it this evening, but really has spent quite a bit of time just in terms of looking at that buffer, landscape buffer between the current property line and the building. Whether or not it's possible to move the building back a bit. It's certainly something to look at, and it's one of those things. So you move the building back a bit in that kind of interior courtyard on the west side of the building, where we have the children's playground and kind of a fairly intensive kind of landscape area and pathways. You do one thing, and then how does that impact potentially negatively something else? But I certainly hear what you said, and we can certainly take have at least a look at it.
Just to comment on that, that landscape buffer is only going to serve maybe the first two floors. Third, fourth, fifth floor are going to take the full brunt of any, unless there's further sound attenuation, and certainly you've addressed that through the triple grazing.
Yeah.
If I may share my last question at this time. Relative to the project timing, if everything goes according to Boyle, as they say, I know that the developer's also working on another property on the other side of Beacon West. What's the project timing relative to those two? Are they working together? Are they working independently?
Now, I'm not involved at all with the other development on the other side of Beacon. I believe that it is more advanced. I would think that going through this process is going to take several months to go through the rezoning and development permit process. And by the time we get that approved, go through the whole working drawing process and working with the, assuming this was approved, and again, I'm just assuming, no promises, in sometime in the spring, I would anticipate that construction here would probably start about a year thereafter, just only because of the timing in terms of getting whatever agreements in place, and then the whole design, or not design development, but the whole building permit drawing applications and issued for tender drawings. That all, it just all takes time. So that would be my anticipation. Again, I'm not the owner, but as I say, I do understand, I do believe actually they are a bit farther ahead in terms of the design for the hotel site across the street.
Thank you for your answers and considerations, and I appreciate your input. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Nova?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to Mr. Strongatharm. Thank you for your presentation, all very enlightening. I've got a few questions that, much like my colleagues, touch on the speculative rather than the hard and fast construction. First one, and this has been approached before, but you talked about rental for 10 years. Are you open, I'll just ask this point blank, are you open to a substantially longer period?
I think it's fair to say they would be open to discussions with staff about a longer period.
Okay. Thank you. And when we talk about that, we talked about stratification. You mentioned that the intent is for the building to be stratified. There will be a housing agreement in place for probably
X years. Yep. Mm-hmm.
X years. Would the intent be to stratify the building at the time of construction or at the end of that housing agreement? And I ask that for a very particular reason, that even with housing agreement in place, if it's stratified prior, there is the possibility that those strata units could be sold, and you would have a panoply of different owners having to deal with that housing agreement, which would be in place, and it would be fairly strong.
Document.
But at the same time, rather than dealing with a single owner, you're now dealing with a whole group of owners, a strata council, all this sort of thing. I think when we talk about a rental property for either market or below market conditions, it would benefit the potential tenants to have to deal with a single entity rather than a multiplicity of entities. And so I think that would be an issue. I'm not sure, but I think it would. And from my perspective, it would be. With respect to the affordable units, the units that would be below market housing, everybody knows that operating a building, you have certain financial considerations. There's only 4 quarters in a dollar, and it will cost you X number of dollars to operate that building. With 20% of the units below market, the money to cover that difference has to come from somewhere. Would you suggest that that come from the market housing units, or so all those 80% of the units would be artificially inflated in pricing simply to match that 20% below market deficit? Is that how it would work?
You're absolutely right. I mean, the operating budget for the building is the operating budget for the building, and so as a consequence, I mean, the below market rents would have to be covered by the entire aggregate gross revenue in order to pay obviously all the expenses. It's not rocket science there. So it is, that's why I say, I think part of my presentation said that in terms of the offer for having 20% below market is a significant thing. And to your point about, well, do you have to inflate the rents of the others? Well, they will be market, but there is a market rate. I mean, you can't pay $5 a square foot rent. I mean, there's a market rent, yeah. But it would rely on those market rents to actually offset, to cover the overall operating costs.
And if for some reason they didn't, if the market section of the rentals don't quite pan out to where you had hoped they would go, how would that deficit be made up?
Well,
or would it be made up?
You know, that's the risk that the developer's taking. If there was and again, we're getting into theory now, but you know, if there was there's a registered agreement with the town in place the land titles office, and the only way that that could be changed is if there was, if that occurred, would be to come back to council and say, this is the circumstances, is there any consideration for amending the housing agreement? Now, again, we're talking theory here, so I don't want to even presume that, but in trying to respond to your question, I mean, it would be entirely within the town's hands, because you would actually control the fact that there's a registered agreement on title.
Thank you. And the point I'm trying to make there is that we often talk about below market and affordable housing and that sort of thing, but very few people then think about the corollary to that, and that is who pays for it. The money comes from somewhere. And so I'm glad you answered the way you did, because it does, or it should, potentially leave questions in our minds about how this would actually work in practice. The last piece, we've talked a little bit about sound attenuation, and this is something I'm not sure, and perhaps, Mr. Chair, through yourself to staff, maybe staff can answer that question. Very often when you see residential developments on a highway, you often see sound attenuation walls that are built on the highway side to provide a physical sound attenuation barrier. Is that something that could or should be considered in this case, rather than simply relying on heavily glazed windows and
Can I ask the architect?
trees to?
Could I ask the architect
Sure,
to come
please
forward?
Yeah, the sound attenuation walls, you're talking about like the concrete barriers you see along the highway. They work best when they're close to the sound source. So in this case, there's quite a big buffer between, you know, the property line of our property that we're working on and the actual highway. Putting the sound barrier on the property wouldn't really, it would help the first floor units unless it was so high that it blocked everybody's view anyway. So we haven't really looked at that, because they wouldn't be effective in this case. It would be effective in the situation where you've got like where my office is in View Royal. We've got there's a residential development behind us, and it's right on the highway, and they've got a sound attenuation barrier up higher on the embankment that the highway sits on. So that's effective because it's right up against the sound source. It's only got the shoulder basically between where the cars are and where the barricade is. That's effective. In this case, the highways wouldn't let us put it right up against the roadway, like right up against the paving. They wouldn't permit that. So it would have to be on the property that we're working with, and it wouldn't work.
Okay, fair enough, thank you. I'm good, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. So a few of my questions have been addressed, but I'll focus first of all on the below market units. And so it's stated that these will be at 30% of median family income, families with children and families without children. And so what I'm wondering is, when I look at census data, there's different definitions of families, and there's different median incomes for those families. So for example, the median income for a family with a couple and no kids is $95,000 a year. The median income of couples with children is $136,000 a year. The median income of one parent families is $77,500. So I'm wondering, how do you figure that? So when you talk about 30% of median income, what definition do you use? That's the first part of that question. And then the second part of it is, then how do you translate that to the different units? So are you gonna say the 3-bedroom units, we're gonna target those for 2 families with children, and therefore their median income is this, and therefore the rent is this? So I'm wondering how all that plays out.
Yeah, those are very valid questions, because you say there are different definitions, and the way we've submitted the proposal, looking at the town, well, of course, now we do have 2021 census data, so that's the most current income, and looking at a family. So the way it's been initially presented would be 20% of the town, of the, of 30% of the family income is the maximum that would be allocated towards rent, because that's the CMHC standard for affordable rent is no more than 30% of family income. So the 30% is the fixed. In terms of the, what is the base, in other words, what's the family income, I had actually looked at what I looked at the kind of the mean one, which I think actually was at I'd looked at the 95 and I'd done some calculations at 95, and I'd looked at the 130s and done calculation 36. I think, in fairness for this evening, I can't 100% answer that question right now. It's a valid question. It is something that would obviously have to be worked out with staff in terms of coming back. I mean, I have done some internally, done some numbers in terms of looking at family incomes. And we have committed to affordable units in terms of not just the one bedrooms. In other words, it would be a cross-section based on the ratio of units that are proposed. So I think probably the best thing to do right now is that this is a valid question that we need to get back to you on with some further discussions with staff.
Yeah, sure.
If that's okay, because
Oh,
I don't
well, yeah,
want
no,
to mislead.
I wanted to bring it up
Yeah.
and find out if there was something in the works or if it had been considered. So it's good that there's gonna be some extra work on that. And I guess my expectation is when we come up with that housing agreement, I think it would have to be very specific, rather than just saying 30% of median family income. As I said, define what family we're talking about. And I think that there would probably be a different calculation for different units. So for example, it wouldn't make sense to take the median income of families with children, which is 136,000, and so the monthly rent for that would be 3,400. So you wouldn't obviously apply that to a
obviously.
one-bedroom unit, right?
No.
So I think it seems that there'd have to be different calculations.
Yes, and
Yeah,
I
so
think that's a very valid
Yeah, so
point and question.
I'll
Yes.
leave that with you, and we'll see how that works out. In regards to the parking, I'm wondering, my questions around that are, how will it be allocated? And will there be additional costs for parking for the people that, or is parking just gonna be provided? Or will it be sort of an add-on thing, that the unit is this, but if you want parking, it's an extra $200 a month or something?
To be honest, that's something else I'll have to defer, because I'm not
Okay.
but it is a question, because I personally can't answer. That's an ownership question.
Okay.
But it's a valid question, and I'll make sure the next time we come for council that we'll
Sure.
have some answers to that.
And
And I
maybe-
just don't want, again, I'm just
Yeah, okay,
say
that's
something off the
fine.
top of my head.
And if they can also, I would also be interested in whatever they come up with in terms of the parking, how will that apply to the below-market units? So, for example, if they say these are the below-market units, but they don't get parking, I mean, I think we have to be factoring in transportation costs and housing costs are related, obviously, so I'd like some more information on that when it comes back.
Yeah, there's always a bit, because I'm actually, admittedly, when you are in my office is downtown, and I do quite a lot of work in the city of Victoria, and of course, parking ratios are so much different there, and particularly some of the older buildings, for example, in James Bay, at least 50% of the parking stalls are not used. It's quite remarkable, and as you've probably heard, there's numbers of buildings now where they have no parking. I think you either have to have parking that meets the requirements, or you have no parking so that I just don't, the in-between doesn't work. But having said that, I mean, I just can't say, whether or not you're in unit 406 and you have an affordable unit, I'm in unit 407, that shouldn't make a darn bit of difference, right? So I don't see the affordability off the top, I don't see whether I have an affordable unit or a non-affordable unit, whether you therefore don't qualify a park. I don't think it wouldn't work that way. What does happen, of course, you have a tenant that doesn't have a car, and then, allocating that potentially to another tenant. But it is a valid question. I'll have to get back to you on that. I just
Yeah,
don't want to.
sure. Okay, done with parking for now. I'll turn now to accessible units and accessible parking. So, very happy to see that you've got the 20%
Yep.
accessible units, and I think we had a discussion about this back in maybe
Yes.
a year ago about these. And my question was around, great to have the accessible units, and I presume that, you'll make them with wider doorways and all that sort of thing. But will they be truly accessible in this, or any of them, in regards to, the lower countertops, the lower switches, electrical outlets? And I think the concern at the time was, what if we do that and nobody wants them?
I mean,
And
that is.
Are you still, is that?
That's been, I have the same issue. I have a very large project downtown, it's in Victoria again.
Yeah.
Same the debate, and the difficulty is as a rental project, trying to leave a rental unit vacant until there's a renter coming in that would require, that have perhaps a wheelchair, and require the lower counters. It's a real problem. I mean, there are ways of having units where you can be adaptable, so they can be adapted.
Yeah, and I
They
guess.
don't really, I'll be honest, they don't really work out very well, from my experience or my
Yeah,
understanding.
well, the thing with the adaptable, I mean, we have that for condos, so people who are purchasing it, obviously, once they've purchased it, they can go and adapt it
Absolutely,
however
yes.
they want. But in a rental unit, a person who needs those accommodations, it's almost kind of pointless to have an adaptable unit that they can't adapt because it's not their property. And they
Yeah.
Right, so I guess what I would put out there again to you is, I know that if you were to talk to BC Housing, you might get an idea of, there's significant demand for that. And so whether, based on the demand that they know that there is for these sorts of units, whether you might
Yeah, I
be
could.
able to factor a small number of those
I
in.
could definitely, I mean, I have actually a BC Housing project, I was talking to BC Housing today for a project that with its 3/4 finished construction, and it's an affordable housing project. We certainly have adaptable units in there, but that's a valid, I can
Yeah.
easily find that out and ask the question of BC
Yeah,
Housing.
and I guess also, so, moving on to the accessible parking spots. So we have 20% of the units that are adaptable, but not 20% of the parking spots, which, I wouldn't expect that we would have 20% of the parking spots. But I'm concerned that, I think you're including 6 accessible spots, is that? And-
Let me ask the architect.
And I'm just wondering, and my question is, do we think that's enough when we've got a number, 20% of the units for people with accessibility issues? And also, will those spots be allocated to the accessible or accessible adaptable units, or would they be in the visitors area?
Well, I'm gonna go back to the adaptable issue.
Yeah,
The adaptables, it's adaptable, not accessible.
Yeah, right.
So we're providing adaptable suites in accordance with Sydney's bylaw for adaptable suites. We're providing the parking in accordance with Sydney's bylaw for accessible parking. And it is fully accessible, it's not adaptable. So we can provide more accessible stalls, but we're not actually making the suites fully accessible. We're making them adaptable. And I don't know, my understanding of the term adaptability is it's intended for people to age in place. So if somebody develops a disability and they can stay in the suite, they don't have to move somewhere else instantly because the suite is no longer working for them. So the adaptable component in Sydney's bylaw refers to things like wider doors, space beside the doors, so that if someone's got a walker or a wheelchair, they can get close enough to the handle to open the door. It has to do with turning circles here and there, like in the kitchen mainly, in the main hallways, and in the bathroom and next to the beds, so that we have space for a wheelchair to turn around.
Yeah.
It doesn't refer to full accessibility. Now we can, there's always the question whether we should make a suite or a certain number of suites fully accessible, but that, right now, we're just talking about adaptability. So,
Yeah, I recognize that.
yeah,
And
so the number of accessible stalls was just simply in accordance with the Sydney's bylaw, which
Okay.
says, X number of accessible stalls if you have a certain number of parking stalls total. So that's where that came from.
Yeah, sure. Okay, that's good for now. Anyways, on the accessibility thing, I just would encourage you to ponder some of those things a bit more. And I'll leave that. The cooling, I'll also sort of,
Yes.
colleagues have covered that, so I add my voice to those concerns as well. And also in regards to the length of the housing agreement, I don't see that 10 years is enough. Even 20 years, I'm not sure about. What we hear from the housing community is that there is a real issue with rental housing, and as we know, we haven't built it for years. There's going to continue to be a demand for rental housing 20 years from now, I think. So I'm concerned about, stratifying those and not having those available in perpetuity. So I'll just leave that with you as a comment. And just a comment in terms of the look of it. I like the natural stuff, the wood and the rock. Not a big fan of the steel. I'm not sure if the steel is that because it's durable or because it's close to sort of semi-industrial area, but
It is, it's trying to respond to the West Side Design Guidelines, which actually do talk about the industrial and sort of having, and so in
Right.
fact, what you're seeing today compared to what you would have seen back last March, it's not completely changed obviously since then, but in terms of looking at the West Side plan, there are some added elements in terms of the corrugated. So it was actually in deference or in response to the design guidelines.
right, okay. And I think, that's good for me. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Mayor McNeil-Smith?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Strongtham, for your presentation. Thank you for incorporating changes based on previous community engagement. I think they are positive. I'm going to, a number of my questions have been answered by other colleagues' questions and your answers, but I want to touch on a couple, and the first is the affordability. There are a number of ways that affordability can be brought to a housing project. And I'm not going to speak of the scenarios under nonprofit societies because this is not a nonprofit situation. But CRD, provincial and federal, do have different programs that can bring affordability to affordability support, I'll call it, to allow or provide for the affordability of units. And I'm just, I'm curious as to which of those options you may have explored. For example, a CRD or BC Housing in some cases will, I'm not going to, may purchase entire projects, I'm not suggesting that, but unless that was explored, but purchasing units and then operating them as affordable units. At the federal level, CMHC has over the years, I don't know the current situation, but over the years has provided a number of financing programs.
Which is what, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but specifically what has been looked at with respect to a program to adapt in terms of this. If I may, just for a second, I'm sorry I'm interjecting.
No,
but
please.
We have had some discussions with CRD Housing, and in fact, Ann O'Pan and myself met with, just terrible with names, the manager of housing. Anyway, it doesn't matter. And to be honest, one of the things he looked at when we looked at these units, and these units are awfully large. They're really too large for us. And so, so, I mean, it is something, and I know in the staff report, I believe there was some reference to staff also having some discussions with CRD, which is totally fine. But as I say, we did have this discussion, so we certainly haven't looked at, further discussion with the CRD, but I know what our initial feedback was. But in terms of the program that was being looked at was the CMHC program.
Okay, thank you. And you partially anticipated that, the question, and for the benefit of colleagues, that those CMHC financing programs provide project financing at a lower cost than market, such that the proponent is able to reduce the rent on certain units for a certain period of time. And they do have, as I recall, they do have specifications in terms of affordability criteria. Thank you for answering that question. And I'm pleased to see in the staff report, perhaps more of a comment regarding staff, that staff are recommending consulting with CRD on the proposed affordability component, and bringing that information back to council. I'm going to request, if I might, go into a couple of slides.
Sure.
The first one, I can't recall the order that they're in, is the traffic and parking, or sorry, the parking plan slide. That's what it said in the top left-hand corner.
Let me just go back. Oops, I pointed the right. Okay. Oh, there we go. You did the underground, the parking. Yeah, just a sec here.
Yeah, it might have been one of the
I
early
think it's
ones.
one more. This one?
Yeah, that's the one. So I note here, and part of what actually triggered my my consideration or this question is, given the number of residents who will be living here and the desire for some parkland in this neighborhood or common natural spaces for residents, is that the access egress to the underground parking is at the end of the north end of the property, and was consideration given to that access egress actually being closer to Beacon Avenue. It would reduce the cars, traveling back and forth that are going underground all the time, traversing virtually the entire property. But it would also free up space, possible additional green space in that area there. But I realize that that's a very technical aspect to this development, and I don't pretend to have any opinion on what it should be, but just pose that question.
I mean, I do know that the architect and the engineers always have the issue, but there's a maximum grade, therefore you have to have a certain distance for the driving to lead down to the level of the underground parking. I'm not saying that was necessarily the reason, but I know that often comes into place. They're trying to make a very sharp turn, for example, and say have the underground parking go down underneath, just off of Beacon Avenue, for example. That's, well, a combination, a couple of those things are that number one, that is probably an awfully difficult turn and a difficult distance to get down to the level of the grade of the underground parking, point number one. And then the landscape plan, obviously there has at some point in time you got to get underground, but there's a pathway that leads all right out to Beacon Avenue. So it is something I'll make a note. Maybe, do you have another comment? Sure.
Yeah, there was a real simple reason in that I don't know, well, you're looking at that screen, but where we come in off of Beacon Avenue for the pedestrians, we cut that path off if we try to go down underground right away. That was kind of the
Yeah.
only, the most obvious reason. And then we do have, like, as soon as the ramp is low enough that we can get the slab over top of it, we've got the walkways and landscaping coming over top of it again. Yeah, so it shows better on the site plan.
Okay, oh, thank you for that. If you could turn to, I believe it said courtyard slide,
Okay.
please?
Oh, sorry. I think this should be it if it comes on. Did I screw something up here? Maybe if I go back one, will I? Oh, okay, let me just try this one more time. That one, or the next, or the detailed?
Yeah, there's a detailed one. It's a little more aerial.
There's that one. Is that?
Yeah, that one, that's the one.
Okay.
That's the one. So a couple of questions. I'm right in the center. It is the referred to as the playground.
Mhm.
It looks like a fairly small area. Was there a larger playground in the design presented to council in March of last year?
No, the playground stayed pretty much the same size. This image is done by an artist rendering of it. The actual play structure that I've put in the plan is quite huge, and it's actually a timber frame one with sort of natural logs, and it's a pretty cool thing. And it's big enough for many children. It actually, there's a little bit more detail that we would have in the design, like a hill slide, and we also have a fence around this thing, like an open fence that you can see through, whereas the artist just chose to not show that. But security from the parking's important, and it's situated outside of the amenity room space so that parents can sit outside with picnic tables and watch their kids play right there. And it also, in the landscape plan, oh, you had it. It's connected with a walkway that has certain surfacing separation from Yan Place. You come across, and then you can connect to the playground and go into the main lobby of the building. So the idea is that even neighborhood kids and their parents could come by and visit and maybe use the playground. Obviously, it's controlled by the building, but it is something that could be possible, a neighborhood little amenity. And then the 3 trees, might as well mention this now, the 3 green trees, those are the few existing trees on the site that are of significance. Like they're actually real trees, big size. So we've elected to keep them, and they happen to fall inside that open space where the parkade structure doesn't fall. So we will be able to keep them without disturbing their roots, and that's why the pathway that comes from Beacon kind of circles around those trees. And by moving the garden to the other end of the site, we use the garden to buffer the residents at the end. It's a more passive use, so they don't get the same, the building isn't right there, it's set back, and there's room for people to just be gardening, just like they're gardening on the other side. And then that leaves the rest of the courtyard open for a nature kind of experience, create a sort of a little nature park with native plants and a real more pleasant amenity for the building in general. And it can take more shade, so it was a good observation originally.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I do have a question about the landscape now that this slide is up. And I think it's positive that those gardens have been moved and the design of the building has been changed as a given perspective to the adjacent neighborhood. And positive that you've limited the underground space such that you can allow the existing trees, root structure, to stay in its current place. My question is that, and I'm forgetting the exact number, and I won't try and find it, but it's somewhere in the 170s, I'll say 175 trees that will be replaced because of the protected trees that are there. My question is that, and I don't know whether to go with what looks like, I'm going to say umbrellas, but they're the canopies of the trees, those larger green, orangey, yellow. Out of the 175 trees that will be planted on this, as part of this landscape design, how many are intended to be canopy trees? And because the landscape plan description refers to a lot of the trees being small, shrub type trees. So people think of trees as,
Yeah.
you know, larger canopies. I'm not suggesting towering pines or what have you,
Yeah.
but
So it's a very interesting question, and we have on this project, we originally, if you went back to the original proposal, a section of the frontage facing the Pat Bay Highway towards the north end, we were gonna leave as existing vegetation buffer there. It's very scrubby and not great, but we were thinking, well, it already exists, so we could leave it there, and that would provide that green screening. But this site particularly, the protected trees on this site are really small, like hawthorn trees, and very intermittent, and they're mixed with blackberry, and really, once we start, if we were to clean them and try and leave them, then none of them will show up where they need to be. So that results in this discussion about compensation trees. And so on the new scheme, you'll see that a long section along the Pat Bay Highway consists of trees. And that's because I'm, instead of saving scrub brush, putting in all new trees along there, and that'll keep our counts to where they match up with what our compensation trees need to be. And the drawing shows three types of trees basically. One, which is the yellow circles that you mentioned, those are deciduous large canopy trees. Okay. Now I locate those on the south and west side of the building primarily because of sun exposure. So we talked about the building having triple glazing, but also those big deciduous trees will provide the shade needed on the west face of the building, and that's why you see them in the parking lot, and they reduce the heat island effect there. And then as it comes to where you're trying to maintain sun exposure like the garden, we're using coniferous trees like a hedge that could be topped at a certain height that's suitable for letting the sun in, but keeping privacy for the neighbors. Like if their house is 20 feet high, we could cut them at 25 feet or whatever and make it have a tree and privacy. And then the other one are the pink tree symbols, and those are intended as accent or understory trees. Those would be either native trees like vine maple or Japanese maples for not native trees, or like imagine a cherry tree, that kind of thing for accent. And that's why you see them at the front entrance. You see them in the courtyard because you're trying to create accent for people to enjoy that seasonal shift in tree vegetation. So that's what explains how the plan works. But we do have, when you count up all of the tree symbols, we're up and around the amount we need. I think we might exceed it by a few trees for the compensation amount.
okay. Well, thank you very much for that. Thanks. And if you just have a moment to go back to the courtyard slide.
Let's see what happens here.
Yeah. Well, sorry, I don't mean to test the system here. There we are. So I appreciate that this is a rendition. This is, architect design, and then a rendition in terms of the landscaping and playground and so on. But those three larger trees, that is the placement of three existing large trees.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's a reasonable representation of the existing trees.
Yeah, and it actually shows how the courtyard's really defined by the trees, and the trees are protected by the courtyard. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My next question is I'd like to touch on points that two others have spoken on, the EV infrastructure and the adaptable accessible units. And this topic has come up with a previous proponent that came forward that is looking to build rentals as well. It's still in the process. And the question, and it's been touched on, but I want to elaborate on it and appreciate we may not have the answer today. But we understand what adaptable units are. There's been a description of how they're adaptable in terms of wider doorways or turn radiuses and that sort of thing. But the intention of an adaptable unit is that it can be made into an accessible unit. And an adaptable unit in a condo situation, if somebody is purchasing an adaptable unit where it's been designed with the wider doorways and turn radiuses, they can go ahead and have the furnishings and fixtures accessible, whether they're lower counters or what's needed in the restrooms or so on. The situation for in the rental situation is that yes, you're creating the adaptable situation, adaptable plan, as per our bylaw, or as per the town requirement. But how does it become accessible? And I think Councillor O'Keefe was perhaps, directing at that, but I just say it explicitly. And it seems to me that is it a situation where that cost to make it accessible is going to fall upon the rental tenant, Is that is that feasible in a situation where it's one of the below market units? So I'm not expecting an answer today based on how, the response to Councillor O'Keefe and that, but I think it's something that, that quite frankly, we can go ahead and request adaptable units, but if they're not gonna be made accessible in a rental situation, or it's not feasible, where does that cost land? I'd like to hear more about that in the future. And in a similar fashion to the EV infrastructure, so it is a requirement for EV infrastructure to be put into the underground parking area. But what's in a rental situation? What's actually the trigger for it actually to be an EV charging station for someone who has an electric vehicle or an EV vehicle? I don't know if you have a response to that today, or that's just a question to come back.
Pardon me.
Certainly.
So is the question, because there's a commitment, well, the city has its bylaws, right? Because it's rental, how, if I have an electric car, word one actually, how what's the vehicle for allowing me to plug in?
Well, as I understand the terminology and the requirements, thank you. The EV infrastructure is required. So for an underground parking space, that means the power level hydro power level that's required for a charging station is brought to that parking stall, but the infrastructure to charge, the connection for a resident to make to their vehicle is not there. Unless I'm misunderstanding, and I do see a hand for staff through you, Chair. Mr. Hagan?
Sure. Through the chair to Mayor McNeil-Smith, yes, the parking bylaw does require that in all buildings containing apartment and townhouse dwellings, the EV charging infrastructure shall be provided to all parking spaces and terminate in an energized outlet. Previously, the bylaw just required that the conduit be in the building, and then later the outlets could go in as chosen by the owner or by the strata. Now the bylaw requires that the outlets actually be there. So there would be a place for a vehicle to be plugged in, regardless of whether it's a rental unit or an owned unit.
That's excellent. Thank you, through the chair, and my apologies for the question and not being aware of that, but it's very good news. And I'll leave my questions there. Thank you, Chair.
I'm just gonna look to see if there's only one first-time speaker that hasn't spoken, so I don't know if you have any
No,
questions.
thank you. Everybody asked everything.
I as the last person, I have a few questions for you. The step code of the building? Do you know offhand?
Well, it's required to be step code 3.
Right.
We haven't actually got to whether or not we'll make it step code. Step code. Say there's a requirement for step code 3. It's whether or not we go to step code 4, and the building right now is mostly step code 4 for wood frame.
Yeah.
I'm assuming it's step code 3.
Yeah.
The town doesn't have a.
No, I was just curious. My son bought in a building in Langford, and it was step code 4, and I was just really impressed for him. So, with regards to the below market that Councillor O'Keefe mentioned, I think your sign fell off again, Mayor. So, with the mention of the families with children, families without children, I'm curious as to why there was no reference anywhere with single people and a below market component. I'm thinking in terms of if you're doing 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms, you might have 1 bedrooms where you might just have a person who works in one side and they need a below market rental as well. So was that just a slip?
It doesn't. There's not any reference whether I'm an individual and I meet the criteria for a below market rent, as opposed to family. It's just that the 2 and 3 bedrooms have been typically oriented towards families, and so that would be the families. Whereas the 1 bedrooms, as I say, in most BC housing projects, or for example, you mentioned the CRD, there's typically a lot of numbers of studio units as well, and clearly that is much more oriented. But yes, I don't think because there is 1 bedrooms that it's limited that you must have a family of So that's
I didn't think so, but I just thought it was odd that it wasn't in there. With regards to the underground parking ramp, would it be secure or not? Sort of like I'm wondering if there's a gate that's going to go up and down, or Is it just gonna be open?
We haven't got that far, but I'm pretty darn sure there'll be a gate, and there'd be a gate and it would be coded.
Okay, I'm just asking that with regards to.
Because there's also all the underground, all the secure bicycle
Yeah.
parking is also underground. You can get access obviously through the elevator or through some stairs that go down from the units above. But, it just doesn't show, but I'm unaware of any underground parking these days that's not secure.
I guess, the only reason I asked that question is with regards to the two homes at the end of John Place, 2157 and 2162, and constant up and down of a gate, what that might do for their noise levels. I mean, with 140
Yeah,
tenants, or I guess there's only 96 below, but I mean,
Below,
it's hard to say how often it would be accessed or used, but
yeah, I mean, it is
I'm not sure
down-
what impact
the
that would
gate
have
will
on
be-
them.
The gate will be down at the bottom.
At the
I don't
bottom?
want
Inside the,
I don't
likely to be
wanna
inside the structure? Okay.
It's undercover.
Okay,
Yeah,
that makes more sense.
Yeah.
Perfect. Sorry, the right turn in out.
yes.
Is there any thought to measures to what's permissible and what people do are very different things often. So I'm wondering what can be done in terms of making it, say, less advantageous to make those left turns. Because I'm thinking we're gonna have a roundabout up there and we're thinking people are gonna exit to the right, but I witness daily people doing U-turns to avoid that intersection to go back into Victoria. So it's human nature. If I can save 10 seconds, I'm gonna do it, and I'm gonna do a left turn and dart out there, and enforcement's gonna be impossible. So I'm thinking of things that we can do to sort of mitigate people from even attempting to do that. I'm not sure where that falls on you, if that's a municipal or
More of an
roadie
engineering,
thing.
I think
Yeah.
that at the detailed plan, and obviously working with staff, but you can have it so that the one way in and the one way out, you're not coming, you're actually, you're angled.
It's forcing you that.
You're forcing
Yeah.
you to go in and forcing you to turn right onto Beacon.
Yeah.
And so it's just, I think it's just the geometry of the access, I think, which is the important thing that would need to be made sure that it really forces the individual to go right out.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you. And then staff mentioned the drainage issues along the path to the west, and the residents at the open house, which I also attended, had mentioned that as well. So I know, and I noticed in your thing, it said that pre-development, post-development drainage would stay the same. So I'm wondering, what specifically are you thinking about, and here comes your landscaper, to address and I'm assuming it's gonna do with plantings and whatnot, but I thought I'd ask.
Hi again. So maybe we could flip to the landscape plan and then. So stormwater is an important issue here, and there's an existing drainage ditch that runs along the length of the trail on this property, and that reflects what we're doing with what you see in blue on the drawing to the top of the building. We're really taking that kind of rough drainage ditch and turning it into an actual rain garden with absorption materials and drainage pipes and catch basins that will pick it up at the end, at the low end, and deal with that stormwater in a professional engineering but also an environmental engineering way. So that's why you see the blue, the extensive blue length across the whole section to the towards the highway side.
I'm actually referring more to the west side. There's the path that goes from Beacon to John Place.
Oh, okay.
Because the residents living on those properties in John and Skylark were concerned about any kind of extra water that goes in their yard.
Yeah, I think the parking lot will be carefully graded and engineered so that we go to a catch basins and take it to storm. We're not gonna it's not gonna shed off onto neighboring properties.
Okay.
We just don't do that.
If hypothetically speaking, if there were to be an issue that emerged after the fact, would you be willing to address that as the property owners?
Yeah, well, before I get to that,
Sure.
The configuration of the site, this corner here, the Beacon,
Yep.
Pat Bay Highway corner is quite a bit lower than the northwest corner. So we're dropping the whole site so that you can actually have a pedestrian entrance at that Beacon Pat Bay corner. So the northwest corner will be lowered, and there will be a retaining wall around that end of the site. So the retaining wall will be as extensive as we need it to be to retain the neighbor's property, but the neighbor will be higher at that point.
Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, to answer your question, if there was an issue along this side, I mean, that could be taken care of with drainage pipes as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, obviously, we didn't want to leave that as an issue.
Okay.
Yeah, the issues that neighbors often get worried that this is gonna create water problems for them and things, but these projects are dealt with in a professional engineering way, and we have a civil engineer on board as well.
Perfect, okay. Just a couple more here, sorry. And I'm not gonna touch on, just to reiterate the cooling factor, and the possibility of HVAC and heat pumps and air conditioning. As a person who used to own a south-facing home, I can tell you that even with a power smart at home and glazing windows, I couldn't be upstairs in the summer, and that was before a heat dome. So just for consideration, I think it's for livability, this is a really important issue, especially as we're moving forward with climate change. And my last question is with regards to the 4-foot retaining wall in the northwest corner, and I appreciate what you've done there for the resident at 2162 John Place, but it's also 2165 their yard's back on, and I think there's a bit of overlap. Yeah. So it's a 4-foot retaining wall, and then it makes mention of a perimeter wood fence. So what would the total height of the actual?
It's a standard 6-foot.
Standard 6 foot?
So 4 and, yeah.
Okay, that's good. I just sorry, through to staff. Thank you.
Just to note, that's something that we will work with the applicant on, because there are maximum fence heights on
Yep.
top of retaining walls in the zoning bylaw.
Perfect, yeah, thank you. Just an overall comment, I appreciative of the fact that you have addressed a lot of the issues, having, like, as I said before, having attended that open house session online, a lot of the problems that people were bringing up and the residents, in particular in that area, were bringing up, you have addressed, and I think that shows a good sign on your part. There were things that Councillor Fallett from the previous term had mentioned, and you actually addressed most of what she's talked about, the gardens and the play area and the corner of Beacon and Pat Bay Highway. Pulling it back and the rounded, I think, gives that corner a better feel than what it had before in terms of making those 4 corners are pretty pivotal for our community. It's our gateway. So I think you've done a better job there for sure. Definitely appreciate the fact that you've pushed that building back away from that resident to give her privacy, and with the fencing you're proposing and the gardens, I'm hopefully that will alleviate the concern she has if it goes forward. Having more parking than required, that's just not heard of anymore. So I'm really appreciative of the fact and visitor parking. We're never hearing about visitor parking being put into development. So that's, to me, is a really big plus. And having more parking underground rather than surface parking. I mean, there's a lot to like about it. Having said that, I was one of the people that was against Schedule B in the West Lap. So, but it's a struggle because we need rental housing, and we need it very badly, and we need below market rental housing. And I know people will say, well, it's the carrot, but there's only so many opportunities in our community. There's only so many lots that we can do things that actually add value to our community for workforce housing. And this is a potential for one. So I'm not saying I'm fully supportive of it, but I think you've made some great strides forward into changes. And I'll look forward to what the rest of my colleagues have to say about it. And I'll move to second-time speakers, and I'll go with Councillor O'Keefe. I saw the hand first.
Thanks. A couple other things have just kind of popped up in the discussion. And it was kind of touched on a little bit when there was a question about stratification. But I'm still seeking some clarity on what's the long-term plan for the owner of this property. So I know, for example, some developers go and they build developments like this, and then they go and sell it off, with the intention to sell it off to a long-term investor or pension fund or something whose interest is, I just want a building for a long time that I can have a revenue stream coming in. So are they planning to do that, or are they planning to keep it themselves long-term? Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, and I guess sort of all in that, because I don't know too much about the stratification thing. I'll come back to that, include that in there again, is that if they did if their intention was they're gonna stratify, are they gonna maintain ownership of all the units to sell them later? Or would they be looking to sell the units but tell the people that they have to be rentals? So I'm trying to understand all that.
And I'm going to defer this. I hear what you say. Certainly, as I say, the company, they do have now many rental apartments, which they own. They bought, built, and own rental apartment buildings. My understanding is that, well, that is, I believe that's the intent. The strata is just maintaining flexibility, and again, without trying to sound crass or anything about it. So I think your questions are something that I would really probably, rather than me not being the owner getting back, I would have to get back to you on that. But certainly, I know there's been discussions about whether it would simply be a long-term rental or not, but just having, the discussions around the strata was just about, flexibility, but recognizing there would be an obligation for minimum length of time for it to be rental. And then there's a discussion about what that appropriate length of time is.
Okay. Yeah, so it's sort of touched on it with Councillor Novak's
Yes, it
question.
is,
but
yes,
yeah, so
yes.
I'd be interested in getting more clarity on that
Okay.
next time
Yep.
you come back to us.
Yep,
Because that
okay.
will have an impact probably on my thinking and decision. And just a couple other things. Don't necessarily need to answer this now, but when you come back in terms of those below market units, how many would be allocated to the adaptable? I can't remember if I asked that. But
No,
if
you
I
didn't.
I didn't think
Yeah,
I,
and to be honest, if you asked, I would definitely not be able to answer it because we never actually
Yeah.
haven't thought that far
Yeah.
through, so.
yeah, so when you come back and we're talking about those below market units, how many of those would be allocated to adaptable units? And then just in regards to the construction of the building, in sessions that I've been on with, I think it was Landlord BC gave a session about custom-built rentals. And they talked about different sorts of things that you would incorporate into a building that was meant for rentals on a long-term basis. So they would have maybe extra elevator in there. Like, they're recognizing that these are likely to be buildings that there's gonna be a bit more wear and tear. There's gonna be more fluidity of people coming in and out. And so I'm wondering, with that in mind, have you done anything special in this building to accommodate for a different kind of population that you would see, different than a long-term condo sort of building?
Well, although you'd have amenity space in a long-term condo building too, but I mean, a good part of the amenity space was also looking at it sort of being as a long-term rental in terms of kind of the actual durability and whether using sort of additional in terms of the material for drywall or that sort of thing in terms of durability. That's probably the next level of detail. And again, without sounding like I'm deferring the question, because the owners actually do have a lot of long-term rentals, and your point is very true, that often cases rentals for long-time apartment rental owners, they do actually look at it's not like I'm buying, I'm building and selling and I don't have to deal with it anymore. I'm building and keeping it, and so I have to deal with the maintenance.
Right.
And so maintenance then does become an issue over the long-term life of the building.
Right.
So again, I'm not answering your question, but it is something certainly because of the fact that the owners are rental owners of many rental buildings, that clearly is a consideration by them in terms of looking at the detail, particularly the interior design, the materials on the inside in terms of even things like corner posts, all sort of those kinds of elements. So again, I haven't answered your question, I'm sorry, but
That's okay.
I can appreciate the question.
Yeah, okay, that's all for me. Thank you, Chair.
Mayor McNeil-Smith?
Thank you. There was just one little thing is partly curiosity and just something I haven't seen in buildings that have come before council over the past several years. And if you could go to perhaps the Beacon Avenue perspective slide, I think it's called.
Let me think, that will be this way. I think there's that one maybe, is that too detailed? Do you want the farther one up?
Yeah, the one that's a little
Okay,
further out.
it's, it's coming. I think, oh gosh, I guess I've got my apologies. My apologies. Oh, we've dropped to housing. How did we get down there so fast? I think it's before this. It's a fairly large file, so I think that's probably.
To be honest, I think
I'm
I
going
think
the
it was
wrong-
later in
I'm
the.
hitting the wrong, the wrong arrow, I think. Okay, let's try this. 1, 2. Sorry about this. Gee. This is hopping around all over the place. Okay, I think we're getting there. No, I think it's coming up right next. There. So that's the elevation of the straight
Actually,
elevation.
yeah, it's a
along.
little further along.
Okay, another slide, you mean?
Yeah, it's another couple of slides ahead, I think.
And then
That,
that
that's the
one.
one.
Perhaps that's it. Sorry about that.
That's the one. So it's this concept of common area balconies. And I understand this is the frontage facing Beacon Avenue West, that these common area balconies, I guess, would be the second balconies in from the right, on the second through the fifth floor, or second through the, or sorry, are they the first balcony? They're the first balconies we see on the right.
So, are you talking about the first floor?
No, these are on the second to fifth floor. It was in the staff noted it in their staff report, and I see and to the design. And so my question is that these look to be large. I think that's great that you're providing 4 common area balconies for any resident to access. Are they much they look like they're significantly larger than the regular balconies, and
Yeah, I mean, it was the canopy over that sort of secondary entrance off of Beacon Avenue. So I just made a deck out of it. I think I don't know what we were thinking there, other than it just be a nice gathering space outdoor for, if you're on an upper floor and you want to get together with some friends, you got that space to do that without having to go down to the main floor where the amenity space is.
okay? And I think south facing is great. Okay, thank you.
Okay, my apologies for my ineptness.
No, not at all. No.
Look to any, Councillor Novak?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One last question about, well, we talked a little bit about heating and cooling, but the important piece of that in my mind is energy efficiency within the building. One thing I've noticed out west, and I'm originally from Montreal, so the difference between buildings on the east coast and west coast are quite pronounced. And I know you mentioned that your developers are from the east, may have more experience with those type of climatic requirements. Typically on the west coast, when you go into a condo, and I've lived in condos like this or developments like this, developers typically throw electric baseboard heaters all around and say, knock yourself out, have a good time. And if they're really considerate, then they'll do some in-the-wall piping for the potential of putting in a cooling unit with a heat pump on the balcony. For a residential building of 140 units, that is extremely wasteful from an energy perspective. Buildings that size, I think, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, benefit from central cooling and heating units and air handling units in each suite that give them the option for air conditioning and heating, seasonal. It's far more energy efficient. It's better for the environment, and it also provides better heating and cooling options for the tenants. And even in a strata unit, I know the problem with that, when some developers look at it from a strata perspective, they say, well, I don't want anything central. You know, I want to be able to parcel the whole thing out and not have to worry about that. But the reality is that they're going to have a strata association anyway, and they're going to have to deal with certain common area costs, and one of those could simply be heating and cooling costs. So my question is, would the developer consider a more energy efficient and beneficial heating and cooling system that would make this desirable both as a rental unit and as a future condominium if it should ever get to that point? I know some of my colleagues have talked about rental in perpetuity, which I certainly don't disagree with. I think it would be great if it would just be a rental building. But regardless, the heating and cooling requirements would be the same. There's no real difference. People are people. Nobody wants, as our chair suggested, super hot in the summer and super cold in the winter where you've got to spend $300 a month on baseboard heaters. So to me, that would be a big issue, and I know it impacts how the project is built, because you got to make space for ductwork and so on and so forth, and piping for the chilling and heating towers. But I think they're far more energy efficient, including such things as boilers for the hot water, although nowadays I guess they're using
hot water
the on-demand systems. But, you know, can I just ask for your comment on that?
Well, again, I guess deflecting the question a little bit, not because we haven't actually got into detail in terms of the mechanical engineering front. I would say it's interesting because I've got this BC housing project under construction right now. It's be finished in a couple of months. It actually has, it's a step code 4, so there's highly insulated walls, there is air systems in the hallways. It's baseboard heating. And part of it is, again, they're trying to produce units at a reasonable price, and so that BC housing project is a, you know, and I won't go into the details. So, I mean, I definitely hear what you're saying, and it's simply a matter of just kind of looking at what is the entire building envelope, and again, if someone mentioned about the potential for example, step code 4, well, step code 4 doesn't, it just all about, it obviously is about sustainability, but there's a myriad of different ways to get there. Maybe not a myriad, but a lot. So at the risk of kind of not completely answering your question, I mean, it is, I've heard what you've said, and I've heard what others have said, and I mean, it will obviously be something to look at. It is, you know, historically at least it's standard for rental apartments in particular to be baseboard heating, because if the heat is actually being borne by the tenant, they pay for hydro, which is pretty standard. You know, that sort of either baseboard or electric related or types of heating, and there's much more efficient even electric heating these days than just strictly the standard baseboard. I see you're going to say something too. So again, you know, so there are some alternatives, not necessarily going to a centralized heating system, but again, that really has not been decided, and I don't know.
Yeah, basically what Dean said, I just wanted to elaborate on that a little bit. When they do the calculations, like we have to do an energy model for the building, so the whole thing will be modeled, and which will include glazing area, how much insulation we're putting on the exterior walls, how much insulation on the roof, how much insulation underneath. It will all be factored into this energy model that either the mechanical engineer or the building envelope engineer is going to produce for us. And that basically proves, like if we give them some options on what we can do in terms of insulation and heating, cooling, they do the model to prove that or disprove it, and then tell us what we need to do in order to meet that step of the energy code. So if we're going for step code 3, like Dean said, we're doing BC housing projects right now where the primary heat source is electric baseboard. And then they supplement that with heat recovery ventilators. which would be, like on one project we're doing in Duncan, they're ducting all the exhaust fans to a central unit on the roof. And there's an HRV in there, a heat recovery ventilator, and then that warm air is being ducted back into the corridors. So it all gets factored in. So the heat you're putting into the corridor becomes heat that's going to go into the suite. In the summertime, with BC Housing, we had to consider, they require us to have a maximum of 20 hours, 20 overheating hours, basically is what they call it. So with the heat dome in June of 2021, that exceeded that 20 hours of overheating for pretty much every building in the province. So now they're looking at increasing that. So, but we would look at that too. We get our mechanical engineer to tell us what a reasonable assumption would be for that overheating, like how much overheating can we tolerate. And then they would make suggestions for the cooling system to meet those needs. With the BC housing projects we're doing, the one in particular is facing east-west, and so the west-facing wall is a real problem. And the mechanical engineer said, we just have to provide cooling for those west-facing units. BC Housing's issue is they require, if you cool one unit, you have to cool all of them so that everybody's equal. So in that one, we have 35 units, and we have 30 of those, residential air conditioning units, heat pumps on the roof. And they're all fairly discrete, like they're about 2.5 feet high and 3 feet long and 10 inches wide, something like that. So we just got them all set out on the roof and then put a screen around it. That was for a step code 4 building with its electric baseboard heat. So the question of efficiency and energy conservation is dealt with by the energy model. So when they produce the energy model, it tells us what we have to do to meet the energy code, so that we're conserving the energy. But it may be baseboards, may be heat pumps, it may be HRVs. We don't know yet. So we're still, until we get the energy model done, we don't know exactly what we have to do. But a big component of that is insulation. So we're on pretty much every building we do now. We do rigid insulation on the outside of the building, outside of the sheathing, and inside of the cladding. So you don't see it, but the walls are getting thicker, and that deals with a lot of issues of heat loss. And so you can do electric baseboard heating because you're not losing so much heat through the walls and through the roof and through the windows. So it all, it's this big ball that the energy model tells us what we have to do.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other members that have any other questions, comments? No? Thank you, Mr. Strongathorn,
Thank
Mr.
you very
Newell,
much.
Mr.
Thank
Forth, for your presentation and for taking the time to answer committee members' questions. And we'll move on. And there is a staff report, so I'm wondering if staff would like to introduce or add anything to the discussion.
Thank you. Through the chair, no, not at this point. I feel it's been well presented by the applicant, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Sure.
Thank you.
So I'll look to committee members for any questions of staff. Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. So it's great that staff will be speaking to the CRD. And so I'm just trying to get a little bit more understanding of the type of information you would get from the CRD. So would we get information from them, perhaps, like recommendations on how to approach the those below market units? We had discussion earlier about what would be the formula, what median income. So would they be able to provide us some guidance on that sort of thing?
Excuse me, through the chair to Councillor O'Keefe. Yes, the CRD staff indicated that they would be able to meet with town staff and the applicant to talk about assessing the proposed affordable housing levels, to talk about details related to housing agreements, and aspects of monitoring those affordable units through the years that the housing agreement would be applicable for. So all of those details that were discussed earlier, like how many of the adaptable units would be affordable, what would median income be based on, how many households, what would the monitoring of the rent look like, all of that would be in the housing agreement. And it's been a number of years since we as town staff have developed a housing agreement or been involved in that process. The last one was the building at 9830 4th Street, the Aranza, the building that's about 56 units. Half of them are below market rental, the other half are market rental. So that one has a housing agreement on title as well. So that was the last time that we negotiated a housing agreement. So it is really helpful to have that regional support with looking at the affordable aspect of this proposal. So yes, all of those details would be
okay.
something that we would look at.
Great, okay, that's good.
Any other members? I just have a couple. Sorry, I didn't see it mentioned in the report, but I kind of think hypothetically was that the boulevard tree by the bus stop, that would be retained. I don't see any mention of it being removed, so.
To the chair, I'd have to look at the plan and get back to you on that. I'm not sure.
Okay. This is a hypothetical. So with regards to the potential interchange at the highway and Beacon Avenue, and it mentions in the report that if that happens, it's a possibility that Jean Place could become the primary vehicle access to the proposed site. And I know it's all part of the West Lap, but I'm just thinking in terms of the fact that this building is probably going to be in place long before anything else happens, and I'm wondering about potential road improvements to offset the increase in vehicular traffic, given that it wasn't built or designed for that. If it happens to take place before other developments do. Would be like traffic calming, what kind of measures would we be looking at?
And through the chair, that's a great question. That's one thing that's also mentioned in the staff report is looking at what infrastructure upgrades, both surface and underground, would be required in this neighborhood as properties are redeveloped in this way. So that's something that we would look into more and report back on. And in terms of that Jan Place access becoming the main one for this site, that was repeated by Ministry of Transportation in their response to the applicant on this one as well. So over time, I think that is what we would expect.
Okay.
If there is an interchange developed at Beacon and the highway, that would become the main access.
I guess a follow-up to that would be, so if we know they're going through that it's beyond conceptual and they're going through with the interchange or whatever they want to do there, would it be staff's intention to have road improvements done prior to completion so that we're not having to deal with traffic flow issues after the fact?
That the timing of all the road works on the side streets in that neighborhood would be something that we would look at. It might be a bit much to have all that work done in advance, paid for by one developer, when there's so many more privately owned properties along the road to get to this site. And we don't, as it says in the report, we are not aware of any timeline that MODI has for an interchange construction. They haven't given a timeline at this point.
That's why my questions are hypothetical. With regards to the site, I'm just thinking in terms of a construction management plan. I know this is maybe a difficult question to answer, but how do you see the vehicle traffic, trucks going in and out of there in relation to the highway, and how that would play out in terms of impacting the traffic flow?
Yeah, a construction management plan would definitely be a part of the building permit application process, as it is for any major development like this. Even any development on a bus route needs a traffic management plan and a construction management plan. I would expect that even then, right in, right out would be needed for larger vehicles, because turning left across Beacon Avenue isn't ideal. And to the previous question about how would the road design prevent vehicles from making an illegal left turn out of this site, that would be something that would be reviewed by engineering staff and civil engineers for the site as it gets closer to a building permit.
Great, thank you, appreciate that. Seeing no other questions, there are some recommendations, and I might suggest that we maybe do these one at a time, if council's amenable or committee's amenable to that. Councilor Rintoul?
Thank you. I'll move the recommendation of the zoning amendment application number RZ 100104 and development permit application number DP 100838 to amend the zoning designation of the property at 2180 Beacon Avenue West in order to allow for the development of a 5-story multi-unit residential development containing 140 dwelling units be forwarded to the Advisory Planning Commission for review and comment.
Second.
Moved by Councillor Rintoul, seconded by Councillor Duck. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Motion carries unanimous.
And I'll move that staff consult with the CRD on the proposed affordability component of the development, and based on this consultation, report back to council with further recommendations regarding the affordability component.
Moved by Councillor Rintoul, seconded by Councillor Novak. Any discussion? Mayor McNeil-Smith?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to propose an amendment to the main motion. So it currently reads that staff consult with CRD on the proposed affordability component of the development based on this consultation, report back to council. Can I wish to insert there back to council at the time concurrently with APC minutes. I'm not sure what the wording should be, but I'm trying to indicate that this staff report would come back to council at the same time that the APC minutes would come back to council.
Staff's comfortable with that?
It's understood, thank you.
Okay. Is the mover?
Yeah, I'm fine to treat that as a friendly amendment if the mover and seconder are comfortable with that.
I'll second that amendment.
Okay. Any other discussion? Call the question on the amended friendly, or do I have to do both, or just the friendly amendment? We're good. Just call the question on the motion. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Motion carries unanimous.
So I think it wasn't dealt with as a friendly amendment, so now we have to
Do the friendly
move
amendment.
Vote on the main motion.
All those in favor? Opposed? No opposed. Motion carries unanimous.
And I'll move that staff analyze the potential effect of the development on the need for infrastructure and park requirements in the area in line with the vision outlined in the town's OCP, and report back to council with recommendations.
Second.
Moved by Councillor Rintoul, seconded by Councillor Duck. And discussion. Mayor McNeil-Smith?
Thank you. I'd like to propose the same amendment that this come back concurrently with APC minutes and the other report.
Second.
Councillor Duncan? No?
Second. I accept the amendment.
You said, okay, so I'll call the question on the amended motion. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed?
Sorry.
Motion.
Chair, I don't know, did a member of committee wish to speak to the main motion?
No,
Yes, I wish to speak to the main motion,
this is
not
a-
the amendment, so
this is the,
we
this
could
is the
have
amended
discussion
one? I'm
after
doing
the
the amendment, I'll
amendment.
do the main one.
The amendment.
Yeah.
Just call it the amendment, not the amended motion.
Oh, sorry, the amendment. So
Okay.
that's what, so, motion carries unanimous. And now on the main motion,
Speakers.
Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. I just had a question through to staff. Does the vision outlined in the town's OCP, is that inclusive of the West Lap, or did we have a separate guidance that might be in the West Lap that perhaps needs an additional amendment, or is that kind of included in that?
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Duncan, yes, the West Lap is included in the OCP, so it's all kind of one and the same.
Thank you.
What we're hearing.
Councillor Duck?
Yeah, at this point, I'm still going to express my concerns about the overall structure, and this comes from the looking at the original and hearing what West Sydney residents had to say. I see some significant tension between this structure and the highway in Beacon West, but also similarly the tension on West Sydney residents, especially on John Place. And the original intent of the West Sydney development was north to south, and this is going south to north. And hence my questions to the proponent was, looking at a much less intense structure as was expressed in public participation. I think this is going to be the first part, and certainly the West Lap calls for multifamily and this density, but I want to remind council of a decision on last council on Skylark, and that was just a 3-story build up there, and I'm concerned about the tension created by this large structure. Although I appreciate certainly the need that we have for housing, and especially for rental housing and affordable housing, I'm just concerned about the overall impact of this structure. Thank you.
I think staff wants to weigh in. Ms. Verhagen?
Just, thank you. Just a point of clarification in terms of the path of redevelopment in this neighborhood. The OCP does, I would have to refer to the policies in the OCP, but I believe it says from the outer edges of the neighborhood in, not from north to south. The previous OCP talked about from the north to the south in terms of industrial redevelopment, but this OCP has policies that it could start from Beacon West, it could start from Gallery, and it could start from the north and work its way.
I agree with you, but originally the residents called north to south, so that wasn't ever implemented in the West Flat, but that's just a reflection on history that I wanted to make sure was clear for the residents there.
Councillor Duncan, did you want to?
Thank you. Yeah, I remember that the original had said north to south as well. I also, though, want to make clear for those listening in the public, and I don't need to probably remind council because we just talked about this last week, that one of the items that we had in our strategic plan from our last term per the housing needs assessment was that Sydney was supposed to perform an audit of our lands to figure out if there was anywhere that we could have affordable housing. And we know that Sydney is very small, and we're essentially, I can't even imagine what Sydney might have for our own public lands that would qualify. And really, this is essentially the only property left. There might be maybe one or two others in addition to this that are coming up there are one or two others coming up in addition to this that have had development proposals, but this is really the only one that has been strictly residential with no commercial and suitable for affordable housing. So I'm not actually too concerned about this one coming up as it has for affordable housing, because I don't imagine that many people in the town would have envisioned elsewhere when they've asked us and said that affordable housing is a priority and this apartment building came up. I don't know where else we would have put one. And so this is kind of the prime site, and that needs to be taken into account. Also, the way that the current zoning and the previous OCP were, the zoning and the uses were actually in direct conflict with each other regarding the commercial use of that site. And so there is very little else that could go here, and I suspect if it had remained remains a commercially zoned site, and then ends up with residential on top, that will be neither a more livable site for anybody else, or better for the people who live there, and it won't be better for the people on John Place, that considering what could be built on this site, because we're going to presume something would be built on this site, not that it would remain a vacant space forever, but this is probably the best that surrounding community could expect, because otherwise it might be commercial with residential on top. And we know that they've just got a very large commercial development there very recently. So I feel that in terms of what we're able to deliver to the community and the accommodations that were made to the concerns that were specifically already brought through to those residents and brought from council, this really ticked all of the boxes, and it ticked the boxes for our community needs. And so I don't want to make it sound, I don't want to leave it without highlighting the way this proposal really met kind of the demands of some of our strategic needs. Thank you.
Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I just want to question through you to staff chair, clarify the process going forward in terms of for people who may be watching, in terms of when the public gets to.
Yeah, there's been a motion on the floor.
Okay, well, this will be business arising then, I guess, after, I guess what I just wanted to be able to clarify, there was an option for public hearing. That's not one of the recommendations. So I'm just wondering where the time would be to ask my question about when the public gets to weigh in next. And I would assume that would be.
I would suggest maybe that you make the motion for that particular option, and then you could just have a discussion about it at that point.
Chair, I think we could have a question arising after the motion is called.
Yeah, it's just a question, not a motion.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay. I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed, motion carries unanimous. Councillor O'Keefe?
Question arising, just for people who may be watching, I think this is a project that will be of significant interest in the community. So my understanding of where we're at is the staff will get some additional information from the CRD. This will go to APC. APC's comments and staff's comments will come back to council again. And if council decides to move forward, then there would be, because there's a zoning amendment, that there would be a public hearing. Is my understanding of the process correct?
Staff, Ms. Verhagen?
Sure, thank you. Through the chair to Councillor O'Keefe. Yes, I mean, the public's first chance to comment on this would be at next Monday's council meeting when the minutes from this meeting go forward for receipt. There's public participation at the beginning of that meeting. It will be on that agenda. And yes, it is a zoning amendment application, so it'll come back to council multiple times, both at the time you mentioned when council receives APC's recommendation. It would come back again if it keeps moving forward when a bylaw to, like a zoning bylaw amendment comes forward for consideration of first and second reading. That happens at a council meeting. If council gives those and directs us to advertise for a public hearing, we would do that. And then there's a public hearing, which happens at a council meeting, and there's also public participation. There's multiple opportunities. So we are at the start of the rezoning process and the development permit review right now.
Great, okay, good. Thank you for that clarification. I just think it was good to kind of reiterate that to the community so that they understand that there's, you know, several opportunities for them to be looking at this and providing input. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Anything further?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Call the question, all in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you.